question that we're going to get into tonight is, can anyone sell their property on a land contract? Is it just open season for land contracts?
Well, that's a great question. And you know me, there'll be a bunch of caveats and rabbit holes. But I'll try and make it as general as possible. First of all, if you're the owner of a piece of property, you can sell your property on land contract to a buyer. However, there are exceptions. One that most investors are familiar with is they'll hear about what we call the due on sale clause. Like there's an underlying mortgage on that home that the seller's selling, and in that mortgage, there's a statement there that says, if you sell this property, the mortgage is due upon the sale of the property.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of people, I don't know if it's not that it's myth, it's more or less whether or not a bank is willing to enforce that provision of the mortgage in the event that somebody goes and sells the property and land contract. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
My argument, and there's quite a bit of legal arguments and case law that says that there actually, until the deed has actually been conveyed from seller to buyer, right? That legal interest has to go from the seller over to the buyer. There actually has not been a sale, so that there is no due on sale until the actual buyer under land contract is paid off the seller.
Okay, so it's like an argument for the definition of what is
really a due on sale.
Okay.
The other thing is, you can get permission from your bank if you want to sell a land contract. I think it's kind of a waste of time. I'm going to disclaim right now that I'm not giving anybody legal advice, but
right.
You should, and we're going to have that somewhere. But you need to be aware that the bank could call the note due. It is a material breach of a mortgage if you don't abide by that provision, but very few lenders actually try to enforce that provision. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So the land contract, can you sell it with a mortgage? Yes, you can. You can also, at times, you can make a transaction where you keep the mortgage and the memorandum of land contract. Pardon me. You can take the land contract and the memorandum of land contract, and you just don't record it, and nobody would know.
Okay.
You could do that. That's not good though for the buyer who may want to get bank financing at a later date, because the bank will want to see some type of demarcation point as to when the buyer started paying on that home. And also they want a payment history, and they want to be able to have a recorded land contract to be able to show that there's this actual agreement between the parties, that it's really official.
Okay? Right. So like if a purchaser were to go refinance a property with the bank to pay out.
Exactly. To pay off the land contract, right?
Okay.
So that's number one. Like, when can you sell? Now, the other thing is that if you sell too many, let's say you're a real estate investor, you've never lived in these properties, and you sell 2 in a year, 3 in a year. There are preclusions in federal law, it's called the Dodd-Frank Act, that makes certain land contract sales a violation of federal law for reasons that really kind of go back to the 2008 Great Recession and predatory lending of the mid-2000s. They don't want companies making a habit of selling properties on land contract, because now you're in the business of, some people would say, doing land contracts for primary residential purchasers can be a predatory transaction if you're doing too many, okay? Because the interest rates on a land contract are going to be higher.
Okay.
So I have to tell you, if anybody is selling more than 3 land contracts in a given year, that they need to actually stop watching this video, and then what they have to do is pick up the phone and call a mortgage and real estate compliance attorney like myself, because you have other issues that you have to accomplish and address under federal law. Okay, so that's a whole different situation.
Okay.
But in general, anybody can sell their property and land contract. You can sell a property and land contract even if you have a mortgage on it. If you're buying a property and land contract and that property does have a mortgage on it, we have to be very careful as attorneys when we draft the agreements. There are certain things that we want to put in the agreement that address the seller's underlying mortgage.
Mm-hmm.
So That's a rabbit
Okay,
hole.
can
Yeah.
you land contract a land contract? So, so I own two properties right now. We flipped and sold one of them, but I'm holding two. Can
Mhm.
I just sell those land contracts even though I still have a land contract?
You would have to have, it's a great question. I
I
don't
don't
see it
intend
often. I
to,
actually,
just asking.
yeah, no. I don't see it often, but I have seen it with kind of a notorious figure on the east side who will remain nameless. But no, not you. Uh, but
I
but
am
I'll
on the
tell
east
you,
side.
right. So first thing is there'll be provisions in the land contract where the seller usually has the rights to do whatever they want with the land contract. They can assign it.
Hmm.
They can go on mortgage get a higher mortgage on the property while the land contract's in play. There's all these things the seller can do. Usually there are provisions in the land contract that will prevent the buyer from either assigning the land contract or you can't take a mortgage out if you're a buyer on a land contract, so you got to pay it off.
Hmm.
But here's the thing. You would have to get, if you want to do a land contract and you're already on a land contract, number one, you're going to have to get an agreement between you and your land contract seller. They have to know about it. Okay. So you have to get their consent. A lot of times they don't have an issue so long as they get their money. They don't care. They
Sure.
might want to approve the contract. But the other thing that you have to be aware of is when you're buying a land contract, you're in the middle. You're still obligated to your
Hmm.
seller. Okay. And lastly, that the party that you're selling to on land contract, it needs to be disclosed that you're also purchasing under land contract. So
Right.
if you don't, because you're not going to be able to give a deed, and that's what the land contract's saying. When you pay me off, I'm going to give you a deed. So
Yep.
you're making a representation that you're going to provide a deed when your purchaser pays off.
Right. So when you, as the original land contract purchaser, don't have a deed, you're then promising it. So it's like, gotcha.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's a snowball effect, and you don't
Hmm.
want that. You'll be liable. So
Right.
you gotta be careful. It
I
doesn't
feel
happen
like
that
there's
often.
better ways, probably better, less complicated ways to do
Yeah,
business. So tying into
yeah.
what you just mentioned, interest rates can typically be higher on a land contract. What is the maximum? And we'll just keep it to the state of Michigan.
Sure.
We're not going to talk about nationwide because it's probably
Uh,
variable. But here
yeah,
in the state of Michigan, what's the maximum allowable interest rate that could be charged for a land contract?
11%.
11%.
So
Okay.
yeah, so we were talking about negotiating terms, right,
Mhm.
between buyer and seller. That's the maximum rate. You could negotiate any rate you want. You could have a 3%, a 5%, an 8%. Usually when people have a difficult time finding financing with a bank, they're not going to get a bank rate. So if you're selling a home on land contract, you don't have to be so sensitive to the rate. And usually a
Mhm.
buyer is not sensitive either. They just want a good home, a nice home to be in, and they're willing to pay a little bit higher rate. But the maximum is 11%. And I just want to share with you as well, it's the interest rate that motivates sellers to sell on land contract because it's a good investment vehicle, especially
Mhm.
in this environment where you can only get what, half of one. I don't even know what they're paying in the savings, or like the yield on a CD is like a half of 1% or a quarter
Right.
percent. So if you can get 8% or 9% or 5%, don't be a pig, take it, because you can get it. You can't get it at the banks, right?
Yep.
And that's why sellers will, like when you approach, you're telling me about your people that you purchase from.
Yep.
If they own a free and clear property and they're looking for a stream of income at a higher rate, if they have somewhere else to go, they'll be happy to sell you their property, right? On land
Yes.
contract.
Yep.
So it's a win-win for everybody. A lot of retirees use land contracts as a means to
Hmm.
fund their retirement.
Yes, and that was my scenario. Is a landlord retired and moved to Florida, Michigan
Uh-huh.
landlord, and he was just sick of trying to manage his properties from Florida. So
Right.
I got a hold of him and he sold to me, and we actually negotiated for 6%. And I remember telling my dad that, and my dad going, "Well, woo, that's high," and I'm
Uh,
like, well, they still cash flow, so it
right.
works for him. 6% got him excited, and 6% also got me excited, because to me it's like, what do I care what percentage he's charging me? That's irrelevant. The only figure I cared about was, what was cash out of pocket, and then what was cash flow coming back in. So
Right.
sometimes you have to kind of just, shift your mindset. I'm not living in these homes. This isn't my personal mortgage interest rate. So
Right.
as an investor, you just kind of have to look at, like, do the numbers work for you and for them? You know what I mean? You gotta
Right.
give a lot.
Usually your down payment on a land contract is going to be
Hmm.
less, right?
Hmm.
So you're not tying up as much capital. So
Right.
your cash flow is better that way. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to look at it, but
Hmm.
in the end, it usually works out for both parties. You know, like the buyer is maybe not bankable. That's the easiest way for me to say it. They're not
Sure.
bankable for a host of reasons, and the seller's just looking to make an income stream.
Sure.
Marriage.
So the
That's it.
next few questions that we have really kind of talks about the acquisition portion. So when you are you've got a few houses that you're looking at, really is where these next couple of questions lead into. So
Mhm.
the next question is, can the seller state in the land contract that the buyer receives the house in an as-is condition and that they waive all claims against the seller concerning the condition of the property?
Well, sure. I mean, you can put you can write into the agreement anything that you want,
Hmm.
but I want to caution you, or and the people who are watching this tonight. The thing is that the land contract, what people forget is the land contract is the seller financing instrument. In there, it will tell you everything about the buyer's obligations, the seller's obligations, but it's not the purchase agreement. That's where people make this confusion. I've told you
Uh-huh.
this before too,
Uh-huh.
Blair.
Hmm.
You know, if you're finding a property, you don't rush in and go, here, let me take a land contract, because it's the purchase agreement. You got one board document. It's the purchase agreement that dictates what are the terms of your seller financing.
Right.
And when you're buying on a piece of property, you need some time to inspect the property. You need some time to do whatever the due diligence you need to do. And the purchase agreement should be executed. And within the financing section, and I know that a lot of the investors here who are watching, I've seen your, look at guys, I have seen your purchase agreements. They're one pagers, and they say, you know, this is how I'm going to buy, and you know, these are the three vehicles, either mortgage, cash, or land contract, right? Well, that's what you have to have in that purchase agreement. You tick off land contract,
Yep.
but all the other terms, you know, that's a financing provision. How are you financing it? Land contract. All the other terms are very similar to any other deal you're used to doing when you buy property and you, let's say, go get a mortgage, or you're dealing with a realtor. That's where, you know, you're going to dictate the terms within the purchase agreement, and it's going to say, hey, we're going to sell this to you on land contract. Here are the terms. And
Hmm.
now you go and you have an attorney or somebody who's capable of writing competently a very good land contract that will say, oh, well, here's the financing terms, but here's all the other things that you have to do while you're buying this property under the land contract. Here are your obligations as a seller. Here are your obligations as
Hmm.
buyer. Okay.
So the language stating the condition of the home is
That would be in the purchase agreement.
not within the land contract. That's within the
No,
purchase agreement.
right.
Okay. Well, that
I
really ties
mean,
into.
you could put it in the land contract.
Okay.
Okay. You know, the buyer's taken as is, but it's best to put it in the purchase agreement. And you also, when you're buying a home on land contract, just because you're buying a land contract on land contract, doesn't mean that you give up your right to a home inspection. It doesn't mean that you don't get a seller's disclosure statement. Those are
Hmm.
still required by law. And a lead paint disclosure, if you're going to live in the property, you need to have that. But the seller's disclosure is required by to be delivered by the seller. Just because he's selling on land contract doesn't mean he's excused and exempt from providing that disclosure. Okay. So the
Hmm.
mechanics of the purchase agreement, the mechanics of the purchase still always need a purchase agreement. Then you have the land contract that comes in and deals with the financing aspect.